1983, we lived at least 4 hours away from both sets of grandparents. After most of my life living in the same town with either set of grandparents, this was an adjustment. Not an unpleasant one, but it was an adjustment. One of the first rituals we fell into as a long-distance family was me going to spend a few weeks each summer with both sets of grandparents. I spent a week or two with my mom's family, staying in the same room my parents, brother, and I had lived in when we'd first moved away. After that, I'd spend roughly a month with my dad's family. And that part of the summer was a very close approximation to the life I'd known before the big move. My dad's family lived where I considered my hometown, and it was farther away from where we live now. My time there each summer ended with my parents coming to pick me up and spending a few days so my parents could visit with family and their friends that they'd left behind when we moved. For most of these summers, my little brother stayed home, and I got to behave as an only child. Also, I had a lot of friends there, friends who had attended my first birthday party. A few times over the years, I even ran into sucky, stuck-up Zachary. To this day, 4 decades later, I am still friends with several of those Texas friends. Over 4 decades later, but thankfully not Zachary. Suck it, Zachary, wherever you are. By my teen years, this annual summer trip to my grandparents would feel like an exile, especially with all of my friends at home going to parties and doing all the other cool stuff, sharing the hot gossip and fun times that forged and deepened friendships. I'd come back at the end of summer each year to all the stories of great times that didn't include me. It made me feel like an outsider, especially when nothing I was doing at my grandparents' felt anywhere near as cool as what my friends were doing back home. But all of that was still a few years off. In 1983, there wasn't much happening socially, and I hadn't even made deep, meaningful friendships with people at my new school. I still thought of it as my new school at that point. The summer of 1983 was the first year I realized just how quickly things could change, and how nothing could be counted on to stay the same. Since I wasn't there year-round, the normal things that happened in the progression of the town seemed bigger and somehow sadder. It was very much that when I landed back in Texas that summer to find a brand spanking new Walmart discount center, and my favorite store, locally owned and operated Jim's Discount, was closed. Jim's was where so many of my 1978 and 1979 wave Star Wars figures had come from, including the large-size Darth Vader action figure I'd saved my money to buy. Let me assure you, saving money in the late 1970s under the age of 5 when your family is broke is a major feat. And Jim's place was a carpet store, and a smelly carpet store at that. I discovered this when my grandmother pulled up in front of the mini mall it lived in, so she could go to the grocery store in the same building. I ran into the store without actually looking. The smell of it hit me first, that rubber lining from the bottom of the cheap carpets and rugs. My grandmother wandered in, slightly cross, and told me not to run off again. We had entered the face on the milk carton phase of the 1980s after all. I followed her to the grocery store full of questions, and being told simply they closed down, business wasn't good. I asked, but where will I get my Star Wars figures and strawberry shortcake stuff? She replied, there's still TGNY, Ben Franklin's, Woolworth's, and Gibson's. For now. The for now was cryptic and felt ominous. In the grocery store, I lingered in the toy aisle as she shopped. They usually had some of the toys I'd like. They usually had some of the toys I collected, but that day it was all old stuff. They still had Empire Strikes Back carded figures, where everywhere else had nothing but a sea of Return of the Jedi figures. I was still trying to find Skiff Guard Lando. They had Strawberry Shortcake minis, but only from the second wave. I had all of those. The only thing at the grocery store I needed or wanted was a Masters of the Universe faker, but he was $2 more at the grocery store, and I only had $10 to last me all week. Luckily, my grandmother had said we would run to Gibson's on our way to Winn-Dixie, where they were having a sale on dairy. And with me there for a few weeks, we needed lots of ice cream and lots of milk for my cereal. Once at Gibson's, they too only had stuff I already had, and their shelves were pretty sparse, like they hadn't restocked from last summer when I'd been here. I mentioned this, and my grandmother shrugged and said, They're probably going to close soon, too. There's a rumor they're going out of business. They just haven't said it yet. That sucks, a lemon. Language, she said in exasperation. But sucks isn't a bad word. I said this rather facetiously. I knew that suck wasn't technically a bad word, but I knew it was rude and not the kind of language I was supposed to use. Not even my mom, who was pretty lenient as far as such things went, allowed me to say, that sucks, a lemon. No matter if Arnold said it on different strokes or not, it wasn't acceptable language for me. I left the action figure aisle dejected. Maybe there was some strawberry shortcake stuff over in the girls' toys. I did have $10, and we wouldn't be back in town until next week when I get another $10. So I could possibly spend a little bit more on strawberry shortcake stuff. Maybe they'd have some Annie toys. I was still missing the Miss Hannigan and Punjab doll and a couple of the outfits. But they didn't even have Annie stuff I needed. And they only had old strawberry shortcake stuff. Wave 1 and 2 dolls. Before they had pets. And as messed up as my lemon meringue had gotten from me forgetting her outside in the rain and ending up in the mud, I wasn't going to spend $7.99 on buying a new one. If I were going to get a new lemon meringue, it needed to be wave 3 and come with her frog frappe. That's when I saw something I hadn't seen anywhere yet. It was the posable Care Bears figures. Now, Care Bears were a big deal in 1983. They'd only recently started hitting store shelves. And while they wouldn't reach the level of insanity Cabbage Patch Kids would in the later half of 1983, they were pretty popular and hard to find, especially at first, before Cabbage Patch Kids. Yet here was a whole end cap full of posable figures. Now, they didn't have the stuffed animals, and there weren't any of the miniatures. I definitely wanted some of those miniatures. They scaled perfectly with my Strawberry Shortcake miniatures and Smurf PVC figures. But the posable 5-inch figures would scale perfectly with my Strawberry Shortcake dolls, and probably Masters of the Universe. And Tila and Zodak and the Care Bears teaming up against Skeletor would be kinda cool. Now, I had expressed interest in having a Care Bear, but had been told by my mom that they were made for babies. So of course my brother was going to get one, but I wasn't going to get one. At least not if it was something my mother was going to buy for me. But also, I didn't know that I wanted a stuffed Care Bear. I was edging closer and closer to turning 10, and I was pretty sure stuffed animals were in fact for babies. But miniatures and posable figures, that was something else entirely different. And it was $4.99, the same price as Masters of the Universe, only $2 more than a Star Wars figure, and $3 more than a Strawberry Lamb miniature. After taxes, that would leave me $4 and change, which meant if we stopped at 7-Eleven on the way home, I could get a Slurpee, or if they had a Star Wars comic I needed, I could afford it. If not, next week when we came back to town, I'd have $14 and change to spend. That would go far, especially if we went to Walmart. But which of the Care Bears should I get? They had Tenderheart Bear, Love-A-Lot Bear, Wish Bear, Grumpy Bear, and Birthday Bear. They were all cool, but Wish Bear, maybe not so much. And Grumpy Bear was a definite no. Not that I didn't want those two. I wanted to collect them all, of course. But I didn't want those two to be my first Care Bear. Love-A-Lot Bear was too girly. He was pink, he had 2 hearts. Definitely not for my first Care Bear. It would be too cliche. They'll have Tenderheart Bear and Birthday Bear. Tenderheart was the actual bear on the Care Bears logo and seemed to be poised to be the He-Man of this line. And it seemed like maybe Kenner knew that, as there were at least 4 more Tenderheart Bears than any of the other bears. In fact, of the other ones, there was only 1 Birthday Bear on the peg, surrounded by Tenderheart and 2 or 3 Love-A-Lot bears. Birthday Bear was a soft, lemony yellow color. There was a cupcake on his belly, and cupcakes at that age were, for me, a rare treat and amazing and delicious. And who didn't love birthdays? I'd had mine a few months before and gotten a ton of cool Star Wars and Strawberry Shortcake stuff. That kind of sealed the deal, so Birthday Bear it was. I felt pretty confident about this purchase, to be honest. And so far as I knew, I'd be the first kid to get any Care Bear stuff in any of my circles of friends. My grandmother seemed relieved I'd found something, and also relieved it wasn't Star Wars or Masters of the Universe. While she'd grudgingly adjusted to the idea of Star Wars with its weird aliens and space monkeys and sarcastic princess, whom I idolized, She had not been so sure about the Tila and Zodak figures I'd unpacked upon arrival a few days before. The previous summer, I'd driven her bonkers with Annie, making her sew me extra clothes for my doll, and I'd sang all of the songs all of the time at the top of my lungs. And I was not a very good singer. She was. So my tone deafness, even at like 8, was probably a bit much for her, even though she was too good-hearted to say that. She seemed to prefer strawberry shortcake dolls. Simple, sweet strawberry shortcake who harvested berries and baked stuff and was kind to her friends. But this Care Bear stuff, she seemed to enjoy the idea of them as I explained my limited knowledge of them, most of it coming from the packaging in my hands as we drove home. For the next few days, I was happy with my Care Bear purchase, hoping upon hope that when we went back to the store the next week, they still had the others. I decided I wanted Love-A-Lot Bear as my second Care Bear. But alas, when we got back the next week, the prophecy had come true, and there was a giant going out of business sale banner across the front of the store. And all of the Care Bears were gone, as were any of the other toys I might want, including Lemon Meringue without her frog. At 50% off, I could have handled a replacement Lemon Meringue without the frog, but all of the good stuff had been picked over, even the Glamour Gals, which I'd started losing interest in the previous year. So I saved my money, and after Gibson's, we went to Walmart, and there I found the Lando Skiff Guard and a Sour Grape Strawberry Lamb miniature, but no Care Bears. So that week, I went home with $8. Hopefully, the next weekend, my last one before my parents came, I could find more Care Bears. But I didn't. In fact, it wasn't until Christmas of 1983, when a posable Love-A-Lot Bear was under the tree for me, that I finally got another one. Then for my birthday in 1984, someone gave me a bedtime bear. To this day, I still sometimes accidentally call a Sleepy Time Bear. I would get a Tenderheart Bear posable figure at some point in 1984. And that was the extent of my childhood Care Bear posable figures. The miniatures were just cheaper, and I was able to get more of those. But honestly, in 1984, Superpowers came out, and Superpowers meant Wonder Woman. And then comic books became a thing, and by the end of 1984, I pretty much decided that Care Bears were, in fact, for babies. And all of my Care Bear stuff went into a box with all of my strawberry shortcake stuff so I could focus on big kid toys.